The other three, which is the juror in seat 57 is next. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. You're juror number 5261, correct?
Correct.
Okay. All right, sorry, I have to keep track of all of this information. All right. We're going to be asking you a few questions, and then you're going to get to go to lunch. All right, so I'm going to start, and then the attorneys will have a few questions for you. Let me start by asking you, and by the way, we're not looking for any particular answer. There's really no right or wrong answers to these questions. It's just the truth, what it is you think and feel.
Yep.
Have you heard anything about this case?
Yes, prior, I have.
Friday you did?
Prior.
Oh, prior,
Yeah.
Okay. Tell me what you've heard.
Just what the media has put out there, just the basic of what happened originally on the back a couple years ago when it happened, about when
Okay. How much did was this all on TV, Facebook, what was it?
a little bit of everything, TV, Facebook, news alerts. It was just a little bit of everything, just the basic stuff of what happened of that day.
And were people talking about it? I mean, have you ever talked to anybody about the case, even back when it happened?
Not much, not really. I mean, it's
Friends, family,
yeah, just
coworkers?
like mention it here and there, but that's really about it.
Okay.
Just mention it here about just here and there, but that's about it.
As a result of all of that, what you saw, what you heard, the casual conversations with others, have you formed an opinion as to Mr. Loyd's guilt?
I have not. I like to keep my opinions open, so I really haven't paid much attention to that part of it.
Okay. The law requires that jurors be able to sit, when they're seated, they have to presume Mr. Loyd to be innocent until and if the state can prove that he's guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Mm-hmm. Can you do that?
Yes, I can.
All right. Do you have any doubts about your ability to do that?
No.
Do you have any religious or moral objections to the death penalty?
No.
Have you ever thought about the death penalty prior to this case?
Once or twice, but I really don't have an opinion on it.
All right. Do you have a position on the death penalty?
I don't have an opinion on that as well.
Okay. Do you have any belief that there are certain cases where if someone's convicted of that, they should just be sentenced to death?
No.
And conversely, do you have a belief that no one should be sentenced to death regardless of the circumstances?
No.
Do you believe that the death penalty is appropriate in some cases?
In some cases, yes. It's going to depend on the facts and the evidence of what's brought.
All right. As I told you, the only case for which you can even become eligible for the death penalty in Florida is a first-degree murder case. Is there anything about the fact that it's a conviction for first-degree murder that would lead you to believe that that case should get death?
No.
All right. And I explained to you the process. State presents evidence in the penalty phase of aggravators. Defense presents evidence of mitigators. Aggravators are reasons to sentence someone to death. Mitigators are reasons to sentence someone to life without parole. I give you the jury instructions, and you and your fellow jurors go back into that jury room. You can talk about it as much as you want or as little as you want, but you can discuss all the evidence, the facts, weigh the aggravators and the mitigators that have been presented to you, And then in the end, it's an individual decision. You have to make the decision about your vote yourself, okay? It's your decision. If you've weighed all the evidence, the facts, you've listened to everybody, you've done all the thinking that you need to do, and you believe that the appropriate sentence is life without a possibility of parole, could you vote for that?
Yes, I could.
All right. And if at the end of that, and you've done all the weighing, done everything you're supposed to do, you believe that the appropriate sentence is death, could you vote for that?
Yes, I could.
All right. Mr. Loyd has raised the defense of insanity in this case. That would be in the guilt phase, when you're trying to determine whether he's guilty or not guilty. Mm-hmm. If at the end of the evidence in that case, and the burden in that is on the defense, they have to prove it by clear and convincing evidence. But if at the end of the guilt phase, you thought about it and you thought, you know, I think he proved it, could you vote not guilty by reason of insanity?
Yes.
All right. And then my last question to you is, remember I told you can't use the evidence that he's been convicted of the murder of Miss Dixon and the unborn child and the life sentence. You can't use it to decide whether or not he's guilty of these charges. Do you have any concerns about being able to put that out of your mind and follow that instruction?
No.
All right, thank you, sir. I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Buxton for the state. Thanks.
Good afternoon, sir. Just barely afternoon. I noticed that your spouse works at a law firm, right?
Correct, yes.
What type of law does that firm handle?
As far as I know, they do a lot of, what's it called? Child cases, like civil cases, child custody cases.
Okay.
Yeah.
It sounds from your answers to the judge a few minutes ago that you're pretty much neutral on your views on the death penalty.
Correct.
You think it's warranted in some cases, maybe not warranted in others.
Correct.
All right. On a scale of 1 to 10, 1 meaning you will never impose the death penalty no matter what, 10 meaning you think it's appropriate for anybody convicted of first-degree murder, regardless of the circumstances, where would you fall?
Probably in the middle, about a 5.
Okay. And the judge has given you a rundown, kind of the process that you would go through as a juror, so I only have a few specific questions. Would you be able to, there are aggravating factors that the state would present to you if we got to that stage of this trial. Mm-hmm. Regardless of the aggravating factors, how many there are, how bad they appear to you, would you be able to keep an open mind and listen to all of the evidence, especially the mitigation evidence, before you came to a conclusion?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. As far as the mitigation evidence is concerned, this is not the time to talk about the details or the evidence that would apply to any aggravating factor or mitigating factor. That's during the trial, you'll learn that evidence. Would you be able to keep an open mind and listen to any and all mitigation that is presented to you, truly consider it and the evidence that relates to it before making a decision?
Yes.
Would your answer be the same regardless of what mitigation evidence would be presented to you? Would you be able to consider it before making a decision?
Yes, I would.
Now, once you listen to the evidence dealing with the aggravating factors and the mitigating circumstances, you would be able to come to a couple conclusions. One, you could find that the evidence just doesn't prove those factors exist. Mm-hmm. Or you could say that the evidence proves those factors exist, and then you have to assign some kind of weight to it. You could say, I find it's proven, but this really isn't important in my decision-making process, so I'm not going to give it much weight at all. Or, this piece of evidence is really important to my decision-making, and it's very weighty, and you give it more value. Do you understand that process?
Yes.
Okay. Once you go through that weighing process, then obviously the decision needs to be made by individual jurors what the appropriate punishment would be.
Yeah.
If one juror decides that life is the appropriate punishment in this case, that's the sentence that is imposed. Mm-hmm. If it would take all 12 jurors to find that the death penalty is appropriate before that becomes a potential sentence in this case. Do you understand?
Yes, I do.
Now, there's nothing that ever requires you to vote for the death penalty. No matter what the evidence shows, no matter what the law is that is explained to you, you always have a right not to vote for the death penalty if you don't think it's appropriate. Knowing that if a the decision has to be unanimous. And if you come to that decision unanimously as a juror, everyone would know you voted for the death penalty in this case. Knowing that, would you be able to come into this courtroom, if you felt the evidence supported the death sentence in this case, come into this courtroom, raise your hand and say, this man deserves to die?
Objection.
Overruled.
Would you be able to, and that's one thing to answer that question of hanging out with friends, saying, oh, yeah, I could do that.
Yeah.
It's different than a real life situation. Looking inside yourself, would you be able to come if the evidence supported it?
I have no comment at this time on that one. It's going to take a little bit to justify that.
Do you feel, if you were strong in your belief that it was the right thing to do, could you do it?
Overruled. Go ahead.
I could, but again, it's gonna, it's gonna take on the evidence and the facts as well.
It's going to take, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
The evidence and the facts about
Sure.
the case, yeah. So,
Oh, absolutely.
So, I'm still neutral on it. It's a 5, like I said before.
Is there anything in your background, your life's experience, that may, in your mind, make you think you may not be a good juror for this type of a case? Anything that just jumps out in your mind?
Not necessarily at this time.
The judge mentioned earlier that one of the issues in this case is going to be insanity. And part of insanity is obviously dealing with a mental illness of some sort. I hate to be personal with you, but I need to ask a couple questions about that. Has mental illness affected either you, a close friend, or a family member at any time in your life?
No.
Do you feel that mental illness is a legitimate issue for certain people in society?
I do, yes.
Would you be able to reserve judgment on whether a mental illness exists in this case and the ramifications of that as far as how it relates to an insanity offense until you hear all of the evidence?
Yeah.
Okay. No further questions. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Beckman. You may inquire, Mr. Loyd.
Thank you, Judge. Good afternoon, sir. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Great. Okay, so, here we are. You're a potential juror, and you're all of a sudden thrown in the spotlight, being asked a lot of questions you probably didn't think about ever before. But you must know why it's important for us to know people's opinions. Because there are obviously some people who they have to pick. I know you haven't given it much thought in terms of death. But I want you to try, when I start talking to you and asking you questions about it, if you haven't given it thought, I want you to try to connect within yourself what is of value to that thought. And so, for example, there was a little bit of a hesitation about voting for death. Why did you feel that way at that moment?
Well, it just depends on, it really comes down to the fact that I go off of, the evidence and the facts. That's what I do. So if I feel like it's that, then, but again, I really don't have an opinion on it. I really don't. It just depends on what the case can bring, what the facts are. That's what I'll look at.
Okay. And that's pretty much the standard thing that most jurors say initially, because it actually doesn't really mean much to us, because all you're saying is, oh, I could follow the law, just tell me what the facts are. But I don't know how you, juror number 5261, are going to apply your life experiences, your beliefs, your moral compass to a case that obviously life or death for my client, Markeith Loyd. So it's important that the standard shtick we put aside, and you try to tell me as best you can. I'm not asking you that you can always, but as best as you can about some of the questions I'm going to ask you. Is that fair?
It's fair enough.
Okay. So first I want to talk about the death penalty itself. What do you think about the death penalty?
Well, my personal opinion on the death penalty is it's going to be, I think, life in prison is probably enough in some cases.
Okay.
Honestly. So it's going to go off of that. So,
okay,
yeah,
so
that's where I stand about that.
Would you agree with me based on what you're telling me is that you seem to be leaning towards life in prison without the possibility of parole as a punishment more than death? Is that true or not true?
I would say it wouldn't be, I mean, from where I stand, yeah.
Okay. Okay, so let's talk about under what circumstances do you think that the death penalty should come into play? If you were on your own island and you had to make a rule about the death penalty, whether you're going to have a death penalty or not have a death penalty, would you have a death penalty on your own island? You're the king.
I probably wouldn't know.
You probably wouldn't know. Okay. Let's say if there was someone else that was with you that created this island, and you both had agreed, well, we're all going to come up with the rules together, and this other person says, I want the death penalty, and then you get to decide what kind of cases where you can seek the death penalty against. What would be the kind of cases that you would put into that box?
Objection, Your Honor. It's improper.
Rephrase.
Okay. In your mind, what kind of cases do you believe the death penalty is warranted for?
Objection.
Rephrase.
Do you have an idea of what kind of cases, in your mind, the death penalty would, let me rephrase this. We have a set of rules, so I want to make sure I ask you the right question. Okay. Are there certain cases that you believe are more in line for the death penalty than not?
Yes.
What kind of cases are those?
Probably anybody that's higher up, anybody that's higher up, government officials, anybody that's kind of high in the command chain, something along those lines.
Meaning that it would be, I don't understand, I'm sorry, I don't understand your response. Could you tell me a little bit more? What do you mean higher up?
So, government officials, probably anybody that's involved in public safety, just anybody that's, that's in charge of that's kind of important, I would say, I guess.
Okay, so
that's what I'm thinking.
Make sure I understand what you're saying. Are you saying that if those persons were killed, then the death penalty would be appropriate? Or are you saying that if they murdered, then the death penalty would be appropriate? What are you saying?
If they were the ones to die.
Okay, so here we have a police officer that was killed. And so what are your thoughts about that?
It's a tragic incident, yes, it is. My thoughts, it's a tragic incident. My thoughts on that, I would have to go along the lines of probably, I don't even know what, looking into their shoes, looking into their eyes of what happened.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we have these rules that exist, and Mr. Buxman talked to you about those, aggravators and mitigating factors, okay? Now, we're not talking about specifically what the aggravators are at this point, we're going to talk a little bit about the mitigators in a little bit, okay? But the status of someone who is a police officer being killed, I guess my first question is, do you think that you would believe, or you believe that if you kill a police officer, you should automatically get the death penalty?
Not necessarily, no.
Okay. You understand the rules that Mr. Buxton talked about, and I'll talk about in a minute, is this issue that you have to weigh aggravators against mitigators. Now, when you're saying you're looking from their shoes, you understand that there's two responsibilities in this case. One is the first part of the case, whether you find Mr. Loyd guilty or not guilty, and insanity is a defense that he's using. And then if that happens, we get to the part where you have to determine yourself individually what the sentence is. You're following that, right?
Yes.
Okay. So when you're talking about putting yourself in their shoes, what are you talking about?
Basically what they would think, what would be the right decision that they would probably want to have or make. That comes into many factors as well.
Okay. Now, just so we're clear, the law says the only things you are to consider in the penalty phase, in the sentencing portion, is aggravating factors versus mitigating factors. You understand that?
Yes.
So the law doesn't say what the victim wants in this case. And you may never know what the victim wants because that may not be allowed to come out. You understand?
Yes.
So can you put that aside and follow the law on the aggravators and the mitigators?
Yeah, I can follow the law.
Okay. So I want to ask you, I'm just going to go through some stuff really quick. Number one is, the only way you're going to be able to sit as a juror in this particular case, in the penalty phase, is that Mr. Loyd has to be convicted of first-degree murder. You understand that?
Yes.
Okay, once that happens, then there are a set of rules that apply, and you are responsible for following them, okay? But 99% of the rules have to do with your choice, your belief, your morals, your understanding of the mitigation and the aggravation and the weighing of that. You understand that?
Yes.
Okay. So the first part is all jurors collectively have to come to a conclusion that at least one aggravating factor has been proven beyond a reasonable doubt. Once that happens, you go to the next step. And so the next step and every step after that is an individual decision by you, okay? The next step is you have to decide what aggravating factors the state has proven beyond a reasonable doubt. And then you have to look at the mitigating factors and decide what mitigating factors have been proven by a lesser standard than reasonable doubt. It's a lower standard. But you have to decide what you believe has been proven to you. Can you do those things?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Then you have to give weight to the aggravators, individually, collectively, whatever you want to do. And you get to do the same with the mitigation. You can give it any weight you want. One piece could be a great deal of weight that you assign it. One piece may be moderate. It's all up to you. Can you do that?
Yes.
Okay. Now, you heard and you were asked questions by Mr. Buxman about mental illness. Mental illness, do you believe, generally, can that be considered in your mind as mitigation, mental illness of the defendant?
Yeah, it could be. Yeah.
Okay. Why could it be? Why do you think, in your mind?
Well, everybody has, it just depends on what happens. I mean, everybody knows in a point in time what they're doing and what they're going to do and what the consequences are. So it just depends on what they're thinking, and if they have a mental illness and they you kind of learn that from a kid, what you're doing and what's going to happen.
What do you mean you learned that from a kid?
Well, as you're a kid growing up,
As you grow up?
Yes.
You're talking about personal responsibility?
Yes.
Okay. So let's go back to insanity. One of the things that have to be proven is that Mr. Loyd had a mental illness or defect. Mm-hmm. Do you believe, based on your belief in mental illness and how it affects people, personally, that you would never believe that that could be proven because you just don't believe it?
I don't believe it couldn't be proven. I'm sure it can be. So I stand in the middle on that as well.
Okay. And the reason I'm going back here is because I have some concerns with the way you answered about mental illness. When we were talking about mitigation, which Mr. Buxman told you is anything in my client's life, from the time he's bored till the moment we're in here court, that you can consider that. And I mentioned mental illness, you went back to personal responsibility. And what we're talking about is your ability to weigh mitigating factors here. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
Can you consider mental illness either in part of his life, whatever attached to his life, if it's proven to you, can you consider that as a mitigating factor?
Yes, yeah.
Can you consider the fact that someone generally has experienced racism throughout their life as a mitigating factor?
Rephrase the question, I'm sorry.
Okay. There are certain people, you see, Mr. Loyd's black, right? So there are black people in our community who suffer racism today. Do you believe that racism exists?
I do believe it exists, but it's going to depend on the person. So you could be a good person, and it's all, to me, it's all media. That's what it kind of blows
It's all
up.
what?
It's all media.
What do you mean by that?
It kind of blows it up. Racism, it's just a word. I mean, everybody's equal in my eyes. I mean, that's the way I look at it, so.
So you don't think that there are some people who suffer prejudice from other people in our community?
I really don't know.
So you don't believe in racism is what you're saying?
Correct.
Okay. So you wouldn't be able to consider it as a mitigating factor in the penalty phase if it was presented to you. If there was evidence of racism against Mr. Loyd or that Mr. Loyd suffered, you would not be able to consider that as a mitigating factor.
I wouldn't be able to because I would put my personal beliefs aside. So
explain that, because a moment ago you said it's all blown up by the media, and so I'm trying to understand what you're saying, that you can consider it now. Do you believe it exists?
I have no comment on that.
You have no comment?
No.
Meaning you can't say that you would use racism as a possible mitigating factor?
I have no opinion. I have no comment on that subject as well.
Okay. Now, a few minutes ago, you said things are blown up by the media, and when we were talking about racism. What kind of things are you talking about that's blown up by the media?
Probably in reference to that, it's going to be protesting, things of that nature. It's kind of emphasized as what they do.
Okay. So they distort the facts, you believe?
Not necessarily, no.
Okay. Do you think that there is a distortion in the news about police officers and protesters?
It's in the media, but I have no comment on that as well.
Okay. So when you say you have no comment, is that you are refusing to answer the questions?
I just don't have a comment. I don't have an opinion. I don't have a comment about it at this time.
Okay. So you don't have an opinion about the things we just talked about?
My mind is kept open. My mind is kept open until proven otherwise.
Okay. So then you can consider racism as a mitigating factor?
I have no comment on that as well.
Okay. So the next step is you have to decide weighing the aggravating circumstances against the mitigating circumstances. Can you do that?
Yes.
It's an individual decision. You understand that?
Yes.
Nobody can tell you what to do. It's all up to you.
Yes.
And then the next step after that is that you have to decide whether the death penalty is an appropriate penalty.
Yes.
Okay, can you do that?
Yes.
Okay. The law says that you are never required under any circumstances to vote for death. Mm-hmm. Do you believe that?
For that law, I don't have a comment on that. I stand in the middle. Like I said, I don't have about a number 5 on that as well.
If I told you that there was an instruction in the jury instructions that said you never have to vote for death, what does that mean to you?
That's giving your own personal opinion. That's saying you don't have to do it. But it's still your choice to do it or not.
Okay, so it's giving you a process that if for any other reason you don't want to vote for death, whether it's moral or otherwise, you don't have to vote for death. Do you understand that?
Yes.
Okay. Those are all the questions I have. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right. No, nothing further, Judge. What? Hold on, Judge.
Thank you. Thank you so much.